Those of you that have worked with me, part of what has come through is about partnering more deeply with ourselves, with our bodies, and taking the opportunity to make sure that we know how to tune in. And this is coming admittedly from a person that really had to learn that. Straight up had to learn it. And so I wanted to provide an environment where we could create a sacred container and bring together the amplification of all these beautiful souls that were able to join us today and deepen in that time of connection and learning and healing. So I very much appreciate all of your light here with me today. The chat will remain open through the call. I'll be checking it as I can. There's some slides I'd like to get through so you have some images and some language, whichever version of that works for you in your own system, as we step through the guided meditation, the scan, and then a little bit of the data dump that I just love, and then back to the scan. And so brain was the first one that I felt called to bring in of the channel topics. And as the universe always has it, I spent yesterday evening with my uncle who has severe aphasia and Alzheimer's, and was struck again about how important this work is in partnering with our nervous systems and deepening our understanding on how to have it work for us and not always against us, with that survival programming that we are very grateful to have. However, when locked in those states of trigger, agitation, fight, flight, freeze, which we'll talk a little bit about, doesn't feel like it's actually working for us. So I wanted to take a moment to allow us to just kind of settle in and land. And so just find yourself in your chair, feeling your back supported, feeling yourself kind of land in this moment. And I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for the beginning part of this, for this meditation. And just begin to notice your breath moving in and out. Really kind of settling into this beautiful physical vessel that we have in this incarnation. And just beginning to let any part of the day that's come with you, or the overanalysis or thoughts or worries, just begin to loosen a bit. As I walk us through this meditation, parts of it are actually to be attributed to Vina Steibel, who is the founder and originator of Theta Healing. She is the one that channeled the roadmap to the seventh plane. Many of you here are accustomed with it, and those who are not. The term that I'll be using for source or divine spirit energy is creator, but please use the word that is most resonant for you. That could be Buddha, Allah, source, spirit, God, creator, goddess, God, or any of those that work for you. Bring that energy in as we connect today to the energy of all that is. And so begin to take any of the busyness that we just spoke to outside of your space as you begin to sink down into your heart space. Taking a breath into that heart space. Just allow it to gently open and unfurl in the way that feels highest and best for you at this time. Maybe releasing any of the tensions in your back, any of the gripping in your hands, or any of the charge or chatter that may be with you today. Thanks. And on your next breaths, just allow that energy to begin to wind down your spine and land in that pelvic bowl. Breathing deep into that place at your root, allow those energies to begin to cascade through your hips, down your thighs, down into your legs, all the way into your feet. And just allow the drains in the bottoms of your feet to begin to open expanding this exit portal for all that's no longer needed at this time. Any of the heaviness, busyness, worriedness to just drain away. Nice. And then, almost like roots, allow these energies to grow down through the layers of Mother Earth, through her magical minerality, lending her support and her nourishment. As you go all the way down into the core of this beautiful planet and anchor into that earth motor. Allowing your heartbeat to sync up with the heartbeat of Mother Earth. And anchoring your nervous system into that 7.83 Schumann resonance. Allowing a tonification of anywhere that is opening to that today. Breathing into that energy and beginning to allow that to come up through those roots, into those feet, massaging the bones and the muscles and the ligaments. And allowing that to move up the legs, the thighs, and back into that root of you. Sending love and healing into the adrenals that are linked with that center, and releasing any overwhelm that may have been surfacing for you. Allowing those energies up through that sacral center, igniting the creativity that is born there, and remembering the sacredness of yourselves. Allowing that energy to float up into that solar plexus chakra and releasing any of the tensions around the diaphragm, maybe any charge around the kidneys. And just lending some love and support into your blood, this life force of these physical bodies. Allowing those to ascend up all the way to that beautiful heart space that you began to open. And if it feels okay for you today, allow it to expand even more. Maybe even 360 degrees. Cascading over your shoulders, down your arms and forearms into your hands, and balancing those hand chakras, extensions of your heart. Bringing any of your energies that have been elsewhere back home. And lovingly and gently releasing anything that you've been holding for another. Allowing those energies to come up to the high throat of the high heart. And sending a blessing into that thymus gland, an anchor to our immune system, to the portal to our heart, to the portal to our higher selves. Just leaving some gratitude in that space. And letting those energies come up to that throat chakra, and anywhere that has felt stuck or closed or even explosive. Just bringing some softening into those places as you connect to the depth of hearing yourselves, of hearing yourself, of hearing your higher self. Letting those energies float all the way up into that brow chakra, to the third eye, to the place we'll spend some time today. And lovingly, I see it as a hug around your brain, around both of these beautiful and right and left hemispheres. And just allowing some balancing between the two sides, as we often tend to be dominant in one side more than the other. And knowing that whatever information is to land for you today, to come in easily and effortlessly, it will do so without fighting, forcing, constricting. Just remembering flow. Mm. And then allowing that energy to ascend to the top of the head, opening that crown chakra to whatever version of creation energy is in alignment with you and whatever terminology carries that resonance. Bring that in. And you're going to imagine this big, beautiful ball of light above your head. You're going to step into that ball of light. And imagine it taking you up higher and higher and higher and higher. Past the stars, past the universes, past the galaxies. Up through the layers and layers of lights. There's dark lights and bright lights. And more dark lights and bright lights. And some more dark lights and bright lights. As you arrive into the golden light of the ascended masters, angels, and archangels, and any of those that are working with you or being called in to work with you to be done so. As you move into the jelly-like substance of the universal laws of all that is. And then into the pink mist of compassion, and allowing that energy to flow into you, through you, and around you, and any of the places that are beginning to open to the highest truth frequencies of compassion, to unfold, to allow, to receive. And allowing that to elevate you higher and higher, and higher and higher, and higher and higher into that tingly, pearlescent, bright, bright white light of the seventh plane of all that is. This is the energy of creation, the origin of divine, pure love, unconditional love, that of which we always did not know, but is available to us as we are sparks of essence of this created energy. And just allow your cells to begin to oscillate and merge with this divine light as you release any illusion that you are separate from source. And we're going to gather up all of that unconditional love from this ubiquitous source and bring it down through those layers of lights all the way to the space above your head. And like a gentle, beautiful waterfall, allow it to pour around you, through you, and in you, and into any of the places that are opening to receive more of that healing light. And taking a deep breath into that energy, into that fullness. And if it feels okay for you, maybe allow it to expand a little bit more. Maybe it even goes beyond your body. Maybe it even goes 6 feet beyond your body, creating this beautiful, sacred container. Allowing one more breath to fill that space. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Mm. Mm. So I invite you all to just take a moment to maybe do, and I shared the term body scan, but I think of it almost like of a snapshot. You had a bit of an experience with that as you possibly imagined, saw, visualized, or felt some of the energy that we were bringing in. And so just take a moment to notice how your cells feel, how your body feels. And if that's not available to you, how your room feels. And if it doesn't come in right away, you can certainly just let your eyes flit to wherever in the room feels called or gets your attention. But just orienting yourself in this space, in this time that we're creating for this healing and this learning. And once you have that snapshot, you can kind of put it to the side as a place that we began today and as a place of what it felt like after we brought some of the meditation energies in. So I am going to pull up some slides for us to move into our topic today of the brain, which of course is very exciting to me and I think always extremely relevant. But I will start by sharing the place we began at, which was the heart space, actually has an electromagnetic field 5,000 times stronger than the brain. And I think that's of note when we live in such a society and culture of thinking, analyzing, doing. And so I wanted to make sure that we anchored ourselves into the heart space today so that this was something that was connected with these big, beautiful brains. So the brain, this is just to give you that orientation for those of you that haven't had a lot of exposure to this magnificent organ that's still being researched, understood, and really defined, if you will. The three parts that they state here are the basics of the brain, right? We've got that long spinal cord that moves into the brain stem, and we'll go over a little bit about that. The little brain in the back, or the cerebellum, and the big part that we normally think of as the brain, or the cerebrum. This picture also denotes this middle section, which we'll speak to as well, which is where the flow of cerebral spinal fluid is created and then encircles the entire brain and the entire spinal cord. Something that has come really big into the functional neurology community and to most individuals moving into deeper healing and those that have meditated for quite some time is the importance of brain waves and their function. And so we have all of these different speeds, if you will. And often I liken it to, like, for those of you that remember a manual shift car, that our desire would be to have flexibility between these brain waves. And so from slowest to fastest, you can see this noted on this slide, delta is the slowest brainwave, and it's likened mostly to the deeper sleep phases. This is where REM phase sleep occurs. This is also where our brain releases something called BDNF, which is the brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is like the healing mecca of the nervous system. But most of the adult cohort has some version of disrupted sleep, and so this is something that is not always available to us. The next brainwave that we walked into today was the theta brainwave. It's the next gear up, or the next faster brainwave. And this is also the place that we enter physiologic relaxation. So if you recall, I mentioned the originator of theta healing is called theta healing for a reason, that we are able to move ourselves into these slower brain waves in order to access our subconscious, in order to access these deeper healing states. And in that modality, to reprogram beliefs and limiting beliefs that we are ready to shift and heal in our lives. The next brainwave up is the alpha brainwave, and it's a bit faster. You see 8 to 13 hertz. And this is an important brainwave for the brain to organize information. This would be why you would hear, oh, take breaks while you study, because this is where the brain actually does its packaging when we're not getting in the way of it. So it's a really important brainwave for the brain itself. The beta brainwave would be, I would say, what most of us thrive in or love. This is your functional brainwave. This is your fast, get stuff done. There's stuff on my list. I got to do it brainwave. And so, of course, we need it in our normal lives, in our waking lives. It's necessary to be here on this planet. And I would say we're a bunch of beta like addicts. We get pretty addicted to this wave and the productivity in it and the reward system in it. However, when we end up spending most of our time in that wave, it's almost like you're grinding the gears to get back down. And so we're not often accessing or easily accessing these slower brain waves. The gamma brainwave is actually the fastest, and it's actually done. I believe I have a link in here regarding the Tibetan monks that would spend time in these higher states of brainwaves, working with attenuating them and cohering them and coalescing them. And it's said to be also the brainwave of genius. And they're using it now in the functional neuro community with binaural beats to help actually break up the plaques in the brain. So if that's something you haven't heard before, there are some modalities that utilize brainwave entrainment by putting one frequency in one ear and one frequency in the other in order to balance both parts of the brain. Really powerful, fantastic stuff. If you're not haven't been exposed to it, I highly recommend doing some more work with it for somebody that was a, I guess I'd say, reformed beta brainwave addict. The entrainment was a really powerful tool to really start to understand what these other states are and to practice with it. As I moved into energy work further, it was something that I was doing through visualization, meditation, and energy work. But you can actually use these frequencies to help balance the brain as well. So meditation on EEG, when studying it, shows that we are actually moving into changing our brain waves through these visualization process, through these, as a child would say, our imagination, but through our focused intention. As you all may know, where our attention goes, energy flows. And we've probably all seen that in different versions of where that served us and where it hasn't maybe served us as well. Maybe it became a bit destructive. And so slowing the brainwave down, working to cohere these brain waves is not only powerful for the flexibility that I spoke to, but powerful for moving us out of those states of fight, flight, and to the point of the beta brainwave. It's actually the only brainwave that we feel pain, frustration, agitation. And so, in learning that, that was the Brain Flourishing book that I can reference if any of you have interest after the call. That was really eye opening. Like, we're addicts to this brainwave, and yes, we needed to get stuff done, and it's where suffering lives. And so that obviously heightened, the attention to, all right, what is this meditation? I wasn't one that had that skill set or came up practicing it or doing it. The first time I was in Shavasana and yoga, I was like, what is this? Like, what is this state? And didn't really fully understand it or completely was comfortable in it because there's a control factor as we allow ourselves to go into deeper states of relaxation until you start to understand that attenuating that baseline of the nervous system serves all. Feeding the brain, energy in and energy out. So epigenetically, what is the quality of what we put in? We all want to drive different output. We all desire to have this organ be healthy and resilient and connected to us in our lifetimes. But do we stop to often think about what we're feeding it? And whether that may be in that internal system, as in a self dialogue, it may be an external system. What are we surrounding ourselves with? And it may be in our relationships, but the brain responds to sensory information of light, sound, and frequency. And all of these will impact the brain waves that I just demonstrated. Metabolically, the brain requires energy to function. It uses 20% of the body's energy supply. And so that's a big chunk. It's a big organ and it's demanding and is intolerant of losing any of this, as you know, from anyone who's gone through a stroke or any other versions of pathology within those systems. In the funk neuroland, we say motion is lotion for the brain. And so, yes, meditation is one avenue for creating healthier brain waves, but movement of the body is a huge factor in this. And you can see in this diagram that there's a three-tiered system for our organisms to be upright. We need to feel our bodies, which is our proprioceptive system. We have our inner ear mechanics, which help show us where we are in space, and we have our visual centers. And all of those tiers need to be stacked up and integrated and speaking to each other to maintain posture, to maintain alignment, and to maintain optimal pathway function. And so that is a big, big point for those of us that are now locked inside quite often on computers, disconnected to daylight. So basic movement, especially of the lower extremities because of the receptors in it, drive function to the brain and to what I'll speak to regarding the frontal lobe, which is the youngest area of the brain, the last to come online and the first to go offline. I love this picture of the circulation within the brain because it really has a depth of understanding that nourishment that's being fed throughout the whole system and how it's delivering that life force energy to every, not only neuron, but every molecule within this system. 400 miles of blood vessels in the brain. It's pretty impressive. And the brain itself weighs about 3 pounds. So it equates to about 2% of the body mass. And yet, as I said, it will take up 20% of the resting oxygen consumption. And so we all might have heard take a deep breath or release with breath. It's super powerful regarding oxygenating the brain itself. This is demonstrating again the path of the cerebral spinal fluid. And in energy work, I always scan this because the flow of it is extremely important. And if we've had any head injuries, falls, maybe even not an impact to the head, even other areas of the body that have been traumatized, they can create rotations or torsions within the meninges, which are the layers that surround and protect the brain and surround and protect the spinal cord. And so the system is like a closed pump system around, obviously, the brain, down the spine, down the brainstem, and then all the way around the spinal cord. And so the visualization I love to give is surrounding that and infusing that with that nourishing energy of love and calm and ease, because the rest of the world isn't bringing that in for us. And so just allowing whatever pictures are landing for you to just kind of roll into the library as we just take a walk through these centers that look so interesting and strange if you haven't seen them. Again, mentioning that that cerebral spinal fluid path runs down the entire spinal cord, protecting and nourishing that spinal column, which is really a pathway, or we might call tracks, right? Communication centers up and down the spine to relay the body to the brain and the brain to the body. This is a beautiful picture of astrocytes, but it's bringing up the lymphatic system of the brain. If you're not familiar with that, this is how the brain cleans itself, how it orients itself around metabolic waste and around healing. So this is a system that is most active at night when we are laying down and we're getting optimal flow to our brains, and especially if we're getting into these deeper phases of sleep. And so sending some ease and love and appreciation into these cells that clean up debris, any trauma, and support our healing in all the phases that we're doing it. The brain itself is turned on by stimulus. And so the moment that this baby comes into the world, from the first touch of air on its skin or touch to the limbs, to the feet, there's stimulus coming from the receptors that receive that input that go up to the brain and begin to turn on the different areas of the brain. And this is how the brain develops. And so early years, there's not as many folds in the brain. There's not as many neural connections. You can see that in the discoordination, lack of being able to talk or walk. And so in these developmental periods, stimulus is so important, and what type of stimulus is coming in. In fact, they did a study with rats that were born and their eyes were covered, so they never received light into the receptors of the eyes. The other group of rats did receive it and then were blindfolded. And what they found was the ones that never received light to these receptors, they didn't turn on. They were blinded. And so it starts to speak to the importance of touch and stimuli for children. And I'll name safe touch and loving stimuli for children, because these are the formative years. And in fact, in vitro and up to about 3 years, the right hemisphere is really what's fed the most. And from about 3 to 6, the left hemisphere comes online. And as you'll see when we speak about the hemispheres, it kind of makes sense when the toddler gets into why, no, why, their series of beginning to engage with their world. So those first 6 years, we are primarily in an alpha brainwave, or theta brainwave, excuse me, which means we're just recording devices. We're just picking up everything in our environment. And so be that our parent modeling, be that the TV show that's on, we are just digesting and recording this information. And so to think to the mass amount of stimulus that kids these days are exposed to so early on, and how that may be impacting our brain formation and the health of our brain. The beautiful thing about the brain is that as long as we are here and connecting to it, it can continue to learn and to heal, especially the more aware we are of what we're feeding it or what is deconstructing it. As I mentioned, the brain does turn on by stimulus and it does form from the bottom up. And so when you think about those tracks or those pathways up the cord, it's meant to come up, feed those centers, turn them on, create these neuronal connections. And as we mature, the brain then starts to what calls is called lateralize, which means it starts to compartmentalize where to put information because its job is to be efficient. Its job is to do avoid pain, seek pleasure, at the most efficient and least energy expenditure. And so genius, but again, back to not always working for us. And so the brainstem itself is the most primitive. It's the most automatic. It's where a lot of our sensory and motor input is becoming coalesced. It's the center that deals with all of those automatic functions of respiration, digestion, sleep, right? Procreation all come from these centers. So really, really important. However, it's also our primitive brain and generally set into survival modes and programs. The next level up, it's called the limbic area. And this is the emotional centers. This is our attachment models, if you're familiar with that term. And it would make sense that if you're safe enough, then you're seeking your tribe or you're seeking your caregiver, you're seeking those that can give you that social engagement that we are completely wired for. And the big part of the brain, or that cortex that we demonstrated in the first picture, actually goes through its largest development once we are upright. So once the child is walking by about 12 months, sometimes that can be a little earlier or later, but it generally is around that time. This is where the brain just flourishes. And that's generally when the child is running around looking for input. I want to get into this. I want to get into that. I want to touch this. I want to touch that. I want to put it in my mouth. And these are all ways to feed that brain's building process. So part and parcel to that motion diagram that I spoke to, that movement paradigm of them now running around the house and touching everything is feeding the brain. In fact, anthropologically, that's exactly when our brains started to increase in size. So as mammals, that first year of life, we are dependent on our care partner and we are not mobile as of yet. And this is when the social engagement system, which I'll speak to in momentarily, which is all the wiring of the face, also comes into this top part of the heart and lungs. It's all wiring up. And it's actually setting the baseline of our nervous system. Are we safe or not? Are we cared for or not? And as you can see by this developmental model sequentially, those are so important for the larger part of the brain to begin to come online and develop what we come to really know as our brain function of thinking, learning, language. And ultimately, that big part in the front I spoke to, its big job is inhibiting. And so once that comes online at about 25, it finally gets there. It's now orchestrating everything, all the interconnections, and how to limit the brain's overexcited ability. And so it's a very important part of the brain, but as I mentioned, the youngest and the first to go offline. So this is another schematic of what I just spoke to, but it does specify that one area in the front that I've been speaking to, or the prefrontal cortex. And these are the things that we would love to have more in our life: focused attention, self-control, compassion, free will, judgment, planning. In Dr. Jill Pulte Taylor's book, she speaks to the right aspect of this, because as you know, we have a hemisphere on each side, that the right prefrontal cortex and cortex is really about connecting to this divinity, into this source energy. And the left has more of the penchant for planning and organizing and seeing outcomes. And we need both. We need both. And in her TED talk of A Stroke of Insight, she actually experienced a stroke to her left hemisphere. And so this genius researcher in this world of neuroanatomy had her own internal experience of what it felt like when that aspect of her system went offline. And what she shared was really amazing, given she had 8 years to learn to like walk and function again. But as that left hemisphere went offline, she fully felt every molecule, every particle, every aspect of her connected to the isness of all that is, no longer stuck in story, no longer stuck in old pain, no longer stuck in fear, anxiety, or anticipation of what was or what could be, and really entered a bliss state. And as that blood vessel that was now disrupting flow, it was like experiencing the left brain be a little bit online and go, oh, this isn't good. I need help. And then go offline of, oh, God, this is amazing. Oh, everything feels so good. And luckily, she was able to orient herself to try to call for help. And when she finally was able to figure out the numbers, which to her just looked like patterns at that point because the recognition part of her brain was offline, she finally was able to place the call and recognize she couldn't speak. And so I'll be sharing the differences of how the brain organizes right to left. And that left is the language centers, is our logic, is our linear sequential thinking. The right is more emotive, emotional. The emotional centers are there, and this ability to connect to what's beyond us. So those are all the newer centers of the brain when you think about developmental status or even in different species. The limbic center that I spoke to, the mammalian center, is that next one down, which I showed on the slide before regarding where's my emotional attachment? And in neurology, we called them limbic loops. These are also where some of our painful memories are stored, where our old wounds are stored. And when we entered a state of activation or triggeredness, this is generally where we are in our limbic looping. And I referenced the reptilian brain, or the oldest part, and all of our basic body of functions are housed here. This is the same model. And this is what we end up with once it's formed, once we have all of these centers that have been stimulated, that have been connected, and now organized into these different lobes of the brain. And so we have centers for where this information comes in and is connected and associated, and then relayed to all of the different lobes in the brain. So the interconnectivity in the brain and its flexibility of brain waves is truly essential in the healthy brain. So, left and right brain. This is a fascinating topic, and I do have evaluation surveys if you have interest in going a little deeper into what your wiring was and what our adaptations became. But as I stated, that left brain is the logic, linear, detail oriented. This is what it's known for. What is known? The right brain, nonverbal, emotional, implicit knowing, and loves novelty, new things. This is a bit wordy, but for those of you that already know which side you tend to lean to, it gives a little bit more language. The left brain can be curious because it's more of the gas pedal, but it also can result in impulsivity. So most often, not always, in the spectral disorders or ADD, ADHD, tend to be a little bit more left brain dominant and right brain deficient. It is possible to have the opposite, and it is possible to have both hemispheres of the brain be delayed in their growth and connectivity. The left brain likes routine, same familiarity. It's very literal. It's it's emotionally motivated at times. It's a motor oriented side. It's a top down orientation. I love to call it, I love to call my lefties very strong in their mental body. Explaining is important, figuring out, problem solving, very important to the side. And yet it's also the side that tends to be not connected to the body itself, right? Not connected to our autonomic regulation, which is a very important part of the nervous system. It's what, as I said, does our respiratory system, does our digestive system, and regulates our survival programming. Our right brain tends to be a little bit more of the brake, tends to be a little bit more cautious, but likes newness, tends to be orientated to metaphorical, to spatial, like global orientation, to social rules, to emotional skills, to empathy. It's very tuned into the sensory system and tends to be oriented from the bottom up. It tends to also be present in the now. and will be more connected to your intuition, your gut feelings, the senses within your body, and tends to be more connected to the body itself. So we all have right and left brain hemispheres, right and left brains, and we do have connections between them, and we do have skills. And many of us who may not have had a stronger one hemisphere or other learned adaptive patterns or went through different trainings or different healings in order to bring up the function of the other side. So again, that's the beautiful part of the nervous system. As long as we're here alive and connected, it can continue to learn and it can continue to heal. This mentions the same thing, but it starts to bring in the wiring of what has been studied regarding the feminine brain and the masculine brain, and finding that in the masculine brain, there tends to be more intra-hemispheric connection, so within one side. And in the feminine brain, there tends to be more between the two sides. They've likened some of it to hunter-gatherer versus hunting as far as where you would need to store information and what would be readily available to you, but I haven't seen as many studies on that that I liked to bring in. But I did find this relevant. I think I have a client on the call who spoke to the book of Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, and if you start to think about how we use our brains, that can kind of create an understanding of why women can be in 50 different parts of a conversation and still understand what the point was. And this is not to name it as a positive or negative, just an understanding of the wiring, or why sometimes if we're more left brain dominant, why we need to finish a sequence, or why we need to get to the answer to the end and not be disrupted by other thoughts or just or disturbing or distracting stimuli. And so just understanding what your wiring was laid down as and where you might desire to start to create more brain stimulus, to create more interconnectivity, or strengthen some of the networks that maybe weren't strongly wired in your upbringing or in your genealogy or genes, genetics. This is a slide I love to bring into my presentations because it really starts to speak to, in general, it's the polyvagal theory for any of you that have heard that, Dr. Stephen Porges. But he started to bring out this focus on our nervous system survival state. And once this was brought into my awareness, it became foundational in my teaching and with my clients because it also speaks to our state of receptivity. And so, although these are happening in the lower brain centers, as mentioned, it means that the higher brain centers have now gone offline. And so, this bottom area or green social engagement system, this is where we are in a state of safety. This is where we're able to be connected, curious, open, compassionate, be in the present, and be in our joy. And I think we would all agree that we would like to have more of that in our lives. And yet, this wavy line right above it kind of brings in what life brings to us. And that could be external, internal, that could be mentally, emotionally, physically, chemically, spiritually, any version of a perceived threat, which is actually the amygdala's job to be purveying the information, which is a gland in the brain, picking up all of the information from around us. And in cases of those that had childhood trauma, it's shown on PET MRI or PET scans that that area of the brain is actually hypertrophied. It gets bigger. That hypervigilance becomes a lived state. And that lived state is still the survival state. So the automatic or autonomic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, because brain and spinal cord are its center or central nervous system, is in charge of this. And again, if you had this saber-tooth tiger jump out in front of you, you would want these systems to turn on to, in a second, not in those big centers, but in a second, decide whether this was something you could fight or whether you needed to run away. And the beautiful part of that is that the body has its entire cascade of responses to support us in that. Blood flows away from the organ systems and into the extremities, preparing the muscles to be able to fight this threat or to be able to run from this threat. And so obviously we're not in a state of digestion at that time. We're in a state of readiness or preparedness. And so the sympathetic system is that gas. It is that gas pedal. And the power of that is we're still in the function of I can. And what I love about this schematic as well is that, yes, it brings up fight, flight all the way at the top, but as you come down that arousal curve, it also has roots in worry, frustration, irritation, And how many times a day are we flitting into these places, into these energies for lots of different reasons that can begin to go up this arousal curve all the way into the places of panic and rage. And for any of us that have lived in those attenuated states, they're not comfortable. That they do not feel good, either to the inside that's shaky and scared and overwhelmed by what could happen or what did happen, or to the part that's enraged and exploding or desiring to. But they do have a place in our nervous system as a survival programming. So, again, beginning to understand that this was simply an activation to protect you, to ensure your survival. And what, as I tune into that, is my skill set for beginning to deactivate that, because anxiety and rage don't just live in the mind, they actually live in the body. When you understand this is a nervous system state, then you start to understand that this is something that we can work with, that we can begin to tonify, that we can work to deactivate, to return to what we're wired for, which is social engagement. The top section of this represents the freeze dynamic of protection, which actually uses a different pathway, which is why it's called polyvagal, because it's speaking to the vagus nerve that travels from the brain, cranial nerve 10, and wanders through the upper part of the body, the heart and lungs I mentioned, because if we need to speed up and run away, we want access to those, and comes down into all of the gut system. Because again, we're wanting to sense ourselves in our environment to know if we are safe or to activate these systems of protectivity. But maybe you've had an experience of freeze in your body. Maybe you have been in states where you had shifted into that really crucial threshold to overwhelm. And this is the I can't. This is the collapse. This is the state of helplessness. It's actually meant to conserve energy because the fight flight takes energy. And so we've all used some of that to get through, to get by, to endure the fight flight, but it's very depleting. It's very draining and costly. And so the state of freeze was meant to conserve that energy. That's the bunny in the headlights or the deer in the headlights, frozen, unable to fight or flee or feigning death. That would be a last stitch protection to survive. But when that state becomes habituated in our bodies, possibly through shame, possibly through practiced or learned shutdown, this is that space of being trapped, depressed, numb, disassociated. This is a heavy place to be. And in my experience with my clients, those that have had histories of being in these states truly have a process of thawing, of unfreezing, and then unwinding these old states of fight and flight that were lived in order to come down to a more attenuated state or baseline of safety. Back to the baby that was born, that's one of the most stressful things they've experienced if there was a healthy pregnancy, right? They're leaving the safe womb space. They're still not, lungs aren't fully online yet because they're still being fed through the amniotic or the umbilical cord. And once they're coming out into this bright, cold space, disconnected, there is a stress response. They go straight into this sympathetic system for survival. And that's needed. As that baby's handed back to that care partner, if they're able to give this care, baby settles and goes back into that safe space. And that's a big part of their initial journey with their nervous system. The first poop, I'm hungry, I don't feel good. There's no ability to language it at that point other than the sound, which is an interesting component, that the sound is an access to alert. But they are hopefully having that nervous system reset. In our later years, we're not always getting to that reset point. And depending on what support system that you had, what type of caregivers that you had, were you ever really making it back down to that zone of safety, that place of reset, and that place of the nervous system that really is our rest, digest, and heal component? And so thank you, fight, flight, freeze, for keeping me alive. And that's not going to be a place of opening. That's not going to be a place of healing. That's not going to be a place of connectivity. This is a demonstration of all of those automatic things that are connected to in this autonomic aspect of the nervous system. And again, thank goodness we want some things turned up and turned down based on our need at the moment. But back to us being our beta brave addicts, in our driven go systems in our culture, in our collective, and being rewarded for that. It's really just coming online more now, these understandings of needing to deepen and nurture this other aspect of the nervous system so that we have balance and flow. That's actually what heart rate variability, if that's something that any of you are familiar with, is meant to measure. Can we respond to a stress and can we reset from a stress? Or are we so attenuated to that stress state, we don't even know what that reset place is anymore? We don't even know what it feels like to be in that place of calm and possibly don't even trust it or don't even want it. Beautiful picture of the vagus nerve and all of its places that it tends to. I love that. Called the wanderer. I threw this picture in because if you noticed on the lat slide, some of the wiring begins all the way up at the brainstem or near the ears. And so a big language at this time in the neurology community is vagal tone. What is your vagal tone? What is the health of your vagus nerve? Is it able to reset? Is it able to have flexibility? And there are different techniques. I mentioned one regarding sound, and this would be why, Mike, if you've worked with me as a client, I invite sound and breath because these are things that start to excite this part of the nervous system. And the vocal cords activating as part of that social engagement system. And so utilizing our physical vessel as a way to move these energies if they have been ignited, activated, or triggered. So sound, breath, and feeling our bodies allows us to get back into our physical system and back into the reset of our nervous system. So the ear itself, we can have a whole session on that, but the reason I brought this picture in is it shows the neck and these points on the ear, which have influences on the path of that wandering vagus nerve. And so spending some time working into these tissues of the neck, connecting to them, using those receptors to turn on that input to the brain, to use that wiring in your favor, to add this safe connective input in, can be really valuable for resetting or just practicing better vagal tone in our daily lives. Because between the media coming at us, politics, family, you name it, these would all be challenging stimuli that could possibly bring us right into that survival programming or limbic looping. So beginning to open ourselves to tools. I mentioned the brainwave entrainment when we started. We've spoken about the breath work and meditation, and this is a little bit more of a touch component to stimulate the proprioceptive system. So stimulating these aspects to your ear is really valuable. When you look this up, they actually have devices you can do this with as well. But I invite you to begin to just start to work your ears in the shower, right? Or when you're washing your face, split your fingers, run it around the sides of your ears, work into these it's called the auricular points, work into these, the edges of it, come into the middle part by the tragus. These are all places that just by that touch, because remember babies, once they're touched, starts to activate the brain. Those are the same pathways that we use, ignite those centers. And so feel free to go into any of the places of tension or maybe discomfort, making sure that you don't take yourself into a place of enduring or deepening pain, because that can ignite the fight flight response as well, which why it was one of the reasons it was such a powerful tool to bring into my body work practice. Because if somebody comes in that state that's either activated or within a session they're taken too quickly into pain, this can ignite the fight flight mechanism itself, which really is not in that place of receiving, learning, resting, healing. So beginning to assess your own nervous system state, beginning to understand where you hold tensions, what your habit is for shutdown, what those energies of emotions that tend to sometimes rule our day, and tuning into that space and seeing what might be an avenue of access for you. Is it a breath with sound? Is it a touch? Is it movement to move the energy out? Breath, movement, and sound are the avenues for releasing these waves of energy in our body. And as Candace Purse speaks to it, she's a researcher for NIH, she calls emotions just molecules meant to be in motion. They're peptides that inform our whole body. Yet when we go into a fight flight state, there is a constriction, a contraction, both in our tissues, because that's also preparing for the fighting or the fleeing, but also in these energy centers to create safety for ourselves. And so if there was that care partner in our early formative years that was able to provide a safe environment, able to support us in the process of co-regulation, because we didn't have enough brain centers turned on, matured, and activated to do it ourselves, then we got the practice of letting these energies and emotions move through us. But not many or all of us had that experience with a caring co-regulator. And not many of us had the practice of allowing these to move through. In fact, we're often told from our parents, don't say that, don't do that, don't act like that. And although they were efforts to condition us into directions of being in a tribal environment, there might also been these imprints of it's not safe to say, or it's not safe to make sound, or I'm not allowed to, or the other overcorrection to, I have to have these really strong boundaries, or I have to be really definite with not allowing anything in. And we're inviting a balancing to these places, to these centers, to these habits, again, so that our nervous system can be in more support of us. This is amygdala that I spoke to, or the threat detector. And when I'm learning it in school, I had to sound it out phonetically. So I always joke when I teach about it that it's Amy Gedalia, and everyone should know their Amy Gedalias. It was the center I spoke to that in children that have had a lot of trauma in their early years, is a center that actually gets bigger because it's used to detecting so much threat. But when that is ignited, we go offline. And so on the left side of the picture, you see when we're low emotion, when we're calm or relaxed, we're in that more regulated state, we have access to all those higher centers. But if the amygdala sense, amygdala, a version of threat, then the higher centers go offline. So these high emotional states, anger, fear, disgust, hate, frustrations, literally bring us down into those lower brain centers. And Dan Siegel, this is that front aspect we were speaking to of the frontal cortex that's not fully developed till 25. That is the first to go offline, the first to lose blood flow. And so that regulation of our emotional responses, our ability to keep attention, our ability to understand our behavior and judgment moves offline. This would be where we say things we didn't really mean or later regret. As I mentioned, Dan Siegel in psychology references it as flipping your lid. If that closed fist represents the newer, bigger area of the brain, once something triggers, activates us, he states it as flipping your lid. And that amygdala is a big part of moving us into that space of reactivity. So in that child's developing mind, that brainstem is understanding, am I safe? The limbic system, am I loved? And if those are met, we can really move more freely into this beautiful upper brain of what can I learn? How can I contribute? That's really what we came in to do. This brings in the component of the anxious brain, which I believe we have all experienced. If we definitely lived through the last few years, we felt it palpably in the collective and in ourselves, and that there are these loops that can turn that up, and there's loops that can turn that down. And so back to that prefrontal cortex of movement, gratitude, kindness, breath, connection. These are all things that help turn up that area or send blood flow to that area to reconnect it, to help us move out of those fight flight states that we spoke to. So feeling your body, movement, breath, sound, touch, if that feels safe to you, to yourself, by another, or any of the proprioceptive, such as foam rolls or balls, things that can bring our awareness into our body if the visualization centers are not working for us. So knowing that most of the looping in the brain is about being able to turn something up or turn something down. So what is something that brings you more connection, and what is your access point with that? And just to recap, as we spoke to before, that we do have these two hemispheres and we want them to be our friends. We need to live in this world with our logic and language and analytical thought and planning. But part of the richness comes from the right brain. Part of the richness comes from really tuning in to our physical body, to our felt senses. This is where intuitive centers are, which are meant to help balance out the over analytical side that often can take over. This is, as I mentioned through Dr. Jill Pulte Taylor's aspect of really connecting to the divine, no longer sitting in any of the childhood wounds or any of the old stories. So building healthy aspects and connections in both brains is paramount. So what music are we listening to? What avenues in time do we create for creativity? These would be ways to allow more blood flow and more stimulus into these centers. And in neurology, we say what fires together wires together. So, what kind of brain are we building? What thoughts are we building that with? What environments are we in that are also creating that stimuli? And what changes are you ready to make? Well-being and resilience is really what we came here to speak about. Yes, I wanted to share physiology of the brain. Yes, I wanted to share wiring. Yes, I wanted to inspire you into creating a different connection and partnership with your brain. But I did bring in the language of the mind. What is our self-talk? What is our dialogue to ourselves? Whether we were taught it, whether we modeled it, whether we inherited it. Often because the subconscious mind is 90% of our brain, it can automate our lives. And as Freud said, making subconscious conscious, we heal. Starting to go into these habits, these patterns again that we inherited, that we were indoctrinated with, that we were programmed with, and we've just automated. And are they creating really what we want in our lives? It speaks also to relationships. And I would stretch that not just with this physiologic connectivity relationships, but the relationship to ourself first and foremost. And therefore, that filters out into the relationships we have with another, with our work, with our community, and the communities that we build. The brow chakra we touched on in the beginning of the meditation. So at this center of the forehead, at the third eye itself. And this brow chakra, which is connected to the brain and to the gland called the pineal body, which is our kind of it's our light detector. It's connected to circadian rhythms, but it's also connected to higher consciousness. Descartes actually said it was the seat of the soul. It is also connected to our pituitary gland, which is an important regulating gland within the brain and an important relay center for the entire autonomic nervous system. But this level, this energetic zone, is also what's governing our creativity, our imagination, our understanding. And I'm going to stretch that term understanding, not just from like the mental body or academic realm of understanding, crunching numbers and data, but that deeper kind of knowingness that comes in when we do lean more into our intuition and when we do lean more into source energy, when we allow ourselves to connect to nature. This is a resetting because this was what we kind of evolutionarily came up with. This is why light, this is why elements, this is why even the sound of like bugs and birds can be really attenuating to the nervous system because we evolved with that. And yet in our very convenient societies, we are very disconnected from all of those nourishing things. This is a place where we gain true clarity, insight, and inner peace as we surrender that inner conflict, that overwhelm, and often states of confusion. I mentioned the third eye, and the other language I wanted you to hear on that is the regulator of regulators for this pineal gland, this little gland that we say is so important for all of this integration and all this connectivity is actually often crystallized in the adult population. And we find that really interesting when it's such an important piece for peace. That was a good one. When it is shelling itself or protecting itself. There's lots of studies as to different reasons that this can occur, but I've seen in my work changes and opening and amplifications in these fields and in these glands, and then track some of that on HRV. So my left brain was like, well, I want to see the data, and my right wanted to understand the interconnectivity and the aspect of higher frequencies, higher relational contracts with yourself, with source, with nature, and that consistency of reset and what that brings into us. The pituitary gland is the master gland of the endocrine system. So it's helping connect all of the systems, as I mentioned, and all the glands so that we stay in this flow state and this state of balance. So 90% of our mental processes are actually done in what's called the gray matter of the brain, which is where the neurons themselves meet and share their neurotransmitters. Those tracks I mentioned in the long part of the cord are where the channels of information are going up and down. I reference that because when we start to do more connective work, even if you don't know these words, even if none of the lobes landed on you or the words for the glands, that effort to connect and tune into these organ systems is paramount. So any of the language that does sit with you, and I don't know why I was called to put in gray matter and white matter and a little more language around the cerebral spinal fluid and a little more around the blood flow, because these are areas, as we said, as our attention goes, energy flows. And most often we are out in this world in the beta brainwave getting stuff done, kind of just dragging this body with us. But if we can really tap into these centers and bring that energy back home, slow the brave wave down, use our breath and sound to release anything that's disrupting that communication or the organization, then we're not only working that relationship between right and left brain, but we're bringing more of that attention, more of that focus, more of that blood flow to any of these areas that are in need of it. And if none of these words stuck with you, if none of these areas made any sense, then just tuning into that part of your body. Maybe it's back at the brow. Maybe it's one of the pictures of the brain. Maybe it was that long, really cool nerve I showed you that connects a bunch of stuff. But just bringing our attention, that breath, that loving energy to these centers creates that sense of safety, creates that rebalancing to the nervous system, creates that flow state. Nikola Tesla, my brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists. Okay. So I invite you again to take that snapshot, going back to that moment before we went into the slides, seeing the picture that was available to you in the first scan, and just closing your eyes and tuning in and taking another snapshot. Maybe something's been activated and is alive for you. Maybe there's something been deactivated and is slowed down. And all is welcome there. And maybe there's an image that's popping back up that's staying resonant for you, calling your attention, coming from your intuition or coming from your logical side, and just letting that be there as you integrate. And integration can look different for different people. It can be movement, it can be stillness, it can be journaling, it can be breath, it can be sound. I'm aware we're coming to time, so I'll make sure this is a brief song, but I wanted you to have this opportunity to just let these energies coalesce. Let the alpha brainwave package whatever it needs to. Let the centers that are opening to be more connected to you have a moment to do so. In my previous beta addicted time, this made no sense and I didn't know what we were doing and why are we just sitting here and I've got stuff to do. But as I've deepened into this path and my own healing, integration, and attunement, this is invaluable, invaluable to allowing the brain to do what it needs to do and likes to do and knows how to do, to allow the energies to come fully in and in resonance, and to give yourself that sacred space and time that we so are worthy and deserving of and often don't have the practice of. So just tuning in for what's up for you. You are at your most lovely when you are being yourself. She reminds you that knowing, accepting, and honoring yourself as a spiritual being in a physical body requires self-care. Now is the time to support yourself by surrounding yourself with beauty and choosing to see its power in every aspect of your life. If you can commit to doing that, you will be amazed at how much more beauty arises to greet you. Open your eyes to the wonder everywhere, even in the most unexpected places. Beauty waits to be discovered. Consider this before you turn away. Beauty is everywhere. It's your time to find it. So I thank you all for the shared space, the time, the gifts of your light, and any of the information that was meant to go with you today. And I am available for any of follow-up questions, time to go deeper on this. And if it's aligned for you, I look forward to seeing you next month at the next group call. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.